The howling wind carried Emma Norwood's sobs across the barren Wyoming landscape, her trembling fingers clutching her swollen belly as she stumbled through the deepening snow, abandoned by the man who had once promised her the world. December 1868 had brought the harshest winter South Pass City, Wyoming had seen in decades. Emma Norwood, 22 years old and 7 months pregnant, had never imagined she would face such a night alone. Just hours earlier, Vernon Blackstone, the mining company clerk who had sworn his love to her, had thrown her belongings onto the street of their small, rented room when she refused to terminate her pregnancy. "You think I want a crying brat?" he had sneered, his handsome face twisted with contempt. "I told you to take care of it. Now get out and don't come back." The door had slammed with such finality that Emma stood frozen for several moments, her meager possessions scattered in the snow at her feet. The few dollars she had saved were sewn into the lining of her dress, but it would never be enough to secure another room, especially not in her condition. South Pass City had boomed with the gold rush, but for a woman alone and with child, it offered little mercy. The few establishments that might have taken her in wouldn't risk their reputation by harboring an unmarried, expectant mother. Emma had tried the boarding house, the back room of the general store, even the church, but found only closed doors and averted eyes. "Please," she had begged Mrs. Willoughby at the boarding house, "just until I can find something more permanent." The older woman's face had hardened. "We don't take in women of your sort. What would our respectable guests think?" Night was falling rapidly, and the temperature plummeted. Emma wrapped her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little against the biting cold. She trudged along the edge of town, following the road that led south. Perhaps she could reach the next settlement before her strength gave out completely. The wind howled through the pines, and snow began to fall more heavily, obliterating the path ahead. Emma's feet had gone numb, and each breath stabbed her lungs like a knife. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder that she couldn't give up. She had to find shelter, not just for herself but for the innocent life she carried. Through the swirling snow, Emma glimpsed a light. Faint at first, then more distinct, a lantern glowing in the darkness. With renewed determination, she pushed forward, praying it wasn't a mirage born of desperation. As she drew closer, the shadowy outline of a cabin emerged. It wasn't grand, but smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. Emma stumbled the last few yards to the door and raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if they turned her away like everyone else? But the alternative was freezing to death in the Wyoming wilderness. Her knock was feeble, barely audible above the wind. She tried again, summoning her remaining strength to pound on the rough-hewn door. "Hello," she called, her voice breaking. "Please, is anyone there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the sound of footsteps and the door swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the firelight. "Sweet Jesus," a deep voice muttered. "What in God's name are you doing out in this storm?" Emma opened her mouth to explain, but exhaustion and cold overwhelmed her. The world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The last thing she remembered was being lifted and carried into blessed warmth before darkness claimed her. Quinn O'Malley had seen his share of desperate situations during his 30 years on the frontier, but finding a pregnant woman half frozen on his doorstep was a first. He carried her to his bed, noting with concern how light she felt despite her condition. After stoking the fire to a roaring blaze, he removed her snow-soaked boots and covered her with every blanket he owned. He studied her face in the firelight, young, with delicate features now pale from cold, framed by damp brown hair. What circumstances had driven her out into such a night? South Pass City was 5 miles away, and no place for a woman to be wandering alone in a blizzard. Quinn had chosen this isolated cabin for a reason. After years driving cattle and riding with various outfits across the territories, he'd saved enough to buy this small spread and some cattle of his own. He valued his solitude, the peace that came with answering to no one but himself, and the rhythms of the seasons. Now this stranger had disrupted that carefully constructed isolation. The woman moaned softly, one hand moving protectively to her belly. Quinn realized he needed help beyond what he could provide. The baby might be coming early and he knew nothing about childbirth. "Madam." He gently touched her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered and she gazed up at him with disoriented hazel eyes. "My baby," she whispered. "Don't worry about that now," Quinn said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're safe here, but I need to know, is the baby coming?" She shook her head weakly. "Not yet, not for 2 more months." Relief washed over Quinn. "That's good. Can you tell me your name?" "Nora," she said, then corrected herself. "No, I mean Emma. Emma Norwood." Quinn frowned at her confusion. "I'm Quinn O'Malley. This is my cabin." "You're 5 miles south of South Pass City." Emma struggled to sit up, panic flashing across her face. "I need to go. I can't impose." Quinn gently pressed her back down. "You're not going anywhere in this weather, Miss Norwood. The storm's getting worse and you're in no condition to travel." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand. I have nowhere to go." "Then you'll stay here until you do," Quinn said simply. "Now rest while I make some broth to warm you up." As he moved to the fireplace where his stew pot hung, Quinn felt her gaze following him. He wasn't used to being watched in his own home, and it made him self-conscious of the cabin's sparse furnishings, the rough table and chairs he'd crafted himself, the bookshelf with his small collection of volumes, the few personal touches that marked this place as his. He ladled steaming broth into a cup and returned to her side. "Can you hold this?" Emma's hands trembled as she took the cup. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." "Quinn," he corrected. "Nobody calls me Mr. O'Malley except the bank manager in town, and I don't much care for him." That earned a small smile, which transformed her face and caused an unexpected tightening in Quinn's chest. He cleared his throat and turned away, busying himself with mundane tasks while she sipped the broth. "You have family nearby, Miss Norwood?" he asked after a while. Emma lowered the cup. "No family anywhere, and please call me Emma." Quinn nodded, waiting for more, but she offered no further explanation. The silence stretched between them, punctuated by the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. "Well, Emma," he finally said, "you're welcome to stay until the weather clears. Then we'll figure out what comes next." "Why would you help me?" she asked, wariness in her eyes. "You don't know me." Quinn considered the question. "My ma died when I was young, but she taught me never to turn away someone in need, said it was the quickest path to losing your humanity." He shrugged. "Besides, what kind of man would I be to send you back into that storm?" "A man like most others I've known," Emma murmured, her hand again finding her belly. Quinn pretended not to hear, understanding that whatever had brought her to his door had left deep wounds. "You should sleep," he said. "Take the bed, I'll be fine by the fire." "I can't take your bed, you're not taking it, I'm offering it," Quinn interrupted. "And I won't argue about it, you need proper rest more than I do." Too exhausted to protest further, Emma nodded. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "Tomorrow I'll find somewhere else." Quinn didn't contradict her, though he knew the storm would likely rage for days. Tomorrow's problems could wait for tomorrow. He added another log to the fire and settled into his chair, listening as Emma's breathing eventually deepened into sleep. Outside, the blizzard enveloped the cabin in white isolation, sealing them together in this unexpected arrangement that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Morning arrived with eerie silence. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts that glittered in the pale sunlight. Quinn had slept poorly, the hard chair offering little comfort, but his discomfort was forgotten when he checked on Emma. She slept peacefully. Color returned to her cheeks, one hand still protectively cradling her belly. In the clear light of day, Quinn noticed details that had escaped him in the previous night's crisis: the mended places on her dress, the worn condition of her shawl, the simple gold band on a chain around her neck rather than on her finger. A widow, perhaps, or something more complicated. Quinn moved quietly to build up the fire and prepare breakfast. He had just set coffee to boil when Emma stirred and opened her eyes. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" Emma pushed herself to a sitting position, looking momentarily confused before remembering where she was. "Better, thank you." She glanced toward the window. "The storm has passed." "This one has," Quinn agreed, "but there'll be more. December's just getting started." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Hungry? I've got biscuits and salt pork." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully. "You've already done too much, Mr. O'Malley." "Quinn," he reminded her, "and feeding a guest isn't any trouble." While Quinn prepared breakfast, Emma insisted on making the bed and tidying herself as best she could with the limited resources available. He noticed how she winced when she moved too quickly, her hand going to her lower back. "Your back troubling you?" he asked as they sat at the table. Emma nodded. "It's been worse since." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Since I had to leave town." Quinn didn't press for details she clearly wasn't ready to share. Instead, he said, "I need to check my cattle after the storm. Will you be all right here for a while?" "I should be going," Emma said, though her face betrayed her uncertainty. "I've imposed enough." Quinn regarded her steadily. "Where will you go?" "South Pass City is 5 miles through snow that's knee-deep in places, and you're in no condition to make that journey." "I can't stay here indefinitely," Emma protested. "It's not proper." "Proper doesn't mean much when survival's at stake," Quinn pointed out. "Look, I won't force you to stay, but at least give yourself a day to rest before deciding. The roads won't be passable anyway until they've had a chance to clear." Logic warred with propriety on Emma's face. Finally, practicality won. "One day," she conceded, "but I insist on earning my keep. I can cook and clean while you see to your livestock." Quinn knew better than to refuse an offer that preserved her dignity. "That would be appreciated. It's been a while since this place had a woman's touch." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Emma's cheeks flushed, and Quinn hurried to add, "I just meant the cabin could use some proper organization. I'm not much for housekeeping." "I understand," Emma said softly, "and I'm grateful for the arrangement, temporary as it is." Quinn nodded and rose from the table, eager to escape the sudden awkwardness. "I'll be back before midday. There's plenty of firewood stacked by the door and food in the pantry." He bundled up against the cold, pulled on his boots, and paused at the door. "Emma," he said, "you're safe here. Whatever brought you to my door last night, whoever might be looking for you, they won't find you here unless you want to be found." Relief and gratitude flashed across her face. "Thank you, Quinn." The bracing cold outside was a welcome shock to Quinn's system. As he trudged through the snow toward the sheltered pasture, where his small herd had weathered the storm, he tried to make sense of his situation. He'd always lived by a code of helping those in need, but taking in a pregnant woman, possibly an unmarried one, given her lack of a wedding ring, complicated matters. People in town already thought him odd for preferring solitude. This would fuel gossip for months. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Something about Emma Norwood stirred protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. The cattle had survived the blizzard well enough, huddled together in the lee of the hillside where he'd constructed a crude shelter. Quinn broke the ice on their water trough and distributed hay, checking each animal for signs of distress. Satisfied they were in good condition, he turned his attention to the chicken coop attached to the small barn. The hens had fared well too, and he collected the eggs they'd laid. By the time Quinn returned to the cabin, the sun had climbed higher, glittering on the snow-laden branches of the pines surrounding his property. The smell of baking bread greeted him as he opened the door, and for a moment he stood transfixed by the scene before him. Emma had transformed the cabin. The floor had been swept, the surfaces dusted, his few possessions arranged more appealingly. She stood at the stove, her back to him, humming softly as she worked. Something squeezed in Quinn's chest, a longing he'd never acknowledged for just this sort of homecoming. "You've been busy," he said, stomping snow from his boots. Emma turned, her face brightening. "I hope you don't mind. I found flour and yeast in your pantry. Mind, this is the best my place has ever looked or smelled." Quinn set the basket of eggs on the table. "The chickens contributed to our dinner. Your animals are all right after the storm. They're hardier than they look." Quinn shrugged out of his coat. "How are you feeling? You should be resting, not cleaning my neglected cabin." "I feel better when I'm useful," Emma said. "And movement helps with the aches." Quinn studied her, noting that although color had returned to her face, shadows of exhaustion still lingered beneath her eyes. "Even so, you should rest after we eat. Doctor's orders." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Are you a doctor now, Mr. O'Malley?" "No, but I've doctored enough horses and cattle to know when a creature's been pushed too hard." He softened his tone. "Just looking out for you, Emma." She lowered her gaze. "It's been a while since anyone did that." The bread was the best Quinn had tasted in years, and he said as much. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After the meal, Emma insisted on washing the dishes despite Quinn's protests. "At least let me dry," he said, picking up a towel. They worked side by side, and Quinn found himself stealing glances at her profile, the delicate curve of her jaw, the way she tucked stray strands of hair behind her ear, the gentle swell of her belly under her dress. Questions burned on his tongue, but he held them back, knowing she would share her story when she was ready. As Emma handed him the last plate, their fingers brushed, and a current seemed to pass between them. She withdrew her hand quickly, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "I should rest now, as you suggested," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Perhaps by the window where the light is good." Quinn nodded, feeling oddly bereft as she moved away. "I have some books if you'd like to read." Emma brightened. "You do? What kind?" Quinn led her to the small bookshelf beside the fireplace. "Nothing fancy. Some history, poetry, a few novels. My mother taught me to read before she passed, and I've always found comfort in books." Emma ran her fingers along the spines. "My father was a school teacher," she said softly. "He believed education was the greatest gift he could give me. After he and my mother died of influenza 5 years ago, I kept as many of their books as I could carry." It was the first personal detail she'd volunteered, and Quinn sensed the significance. "Where were you before South Pass City?" Emma selected a volume of Emerson's essays. "Missouri originally, then Kansas, I came west with." She paused, with someone who promised a fresh start. Quinn didn't press further. "Well, you're welcome to any book here. Not much else to do when winter sets in properly." Emma settled into the chair by the window, the book open on her lap, but her gaze drifted to the snowy landscape outside. "It's beautiful here, peaceful." "That's why I chose it," Quinn said. "After years of cattle drives and bunkhouses full of snoring cowboys, I wanted somewhere quiet to call my own." "You were a drover," Quinn nodded. 12 years on the trails. Started when I was 18, worked my way up to trail boss. Saved every penny until I could buy this place 3 years ago. No wife? Emma asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. Quinn smiled wryly. No, it's a fair question. The trail's no life for a family man, and by the time I settled here. He shrugged. Never met the right woman, I suppose. Or if I did, I was too busy moving cattle to notice. Emma's answering smile held a touch of sadness. Sometimes I think the right person doesn't exist, just people who are wrong in different ways. The bitterness in her voice told Quinn more about her situation than any explicit confession could have. Whoever had abandoned her, the father of her child, had wounded her deeply. Maybe, Quinn said, or maybe we just need to be in the right place at the right time to recognize them. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them before Emma looked away. I should check the fence line before it gets dark, Quinn said, suddenly needing air. Will you be all right here? Emma nodded. I'll be fine. Thank you again, Quinn, for everything. Outside in the crisp air, Quinn tried to make sense of his jumbled emotions. He'd lived alone so long that sharing his space should have felt more intrusive. Instead, Emma's presence filled a void he hadn't acknowledged, yet she would leave soon, had to leave, really. His cabin was too small, his life too solitary to accommodate a woman and newborn. Still, as he trudged through the snow, checking fences that didn't really need inspection, Quinn couldn't help wondering what it would be like if she stayed. The one day Quinn had offered stretched into 3 as fresh snowfall made travel impossible. Emma insisted on contributing to the household, cooking meals that made Quinn realize how poorly he'd been feeding himself and bringing order to his bachelor existence. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine, sharing meals, talking by the fire in the evenings, each careful to respect the other's privacy while living in such close quarters. Quinn made a pallet near the fireplace each night, insisting Emma keep the bed. She protested at first but eventually accepted the arrangement with the promise that it was temporary. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Emma finally shared her story. I met Vernon in Kansas City, she began, her fingers twisting the chain around her neck, not a wedding band as Quinn had thought, but a simple locket. He worked for a shipping company and talked about opportunities in the goldfields out west. Said a clerk with his experience could make a fortune managing accounts for the mining operations. Quinn listened silently as she described how Vernon Blackstone had courted her, promising marriage once they were established in Wyoming. How she'd believed him and agreed to travel west as his fiancée. How they'd arrived in South Pass City last spring, where Vernon found work with a mining company but always had excuses for why they couldn't marry yet. When I discovered I was with child, I thought he'd finally make good on his promises, Emma said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Instead, he was furious. Said I'd trapped him, that he never intended to marry me at all. He wanted me to get rid of the baby. Quinn's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his expression neutral. And when you refused, he threw me out, Emma confirmed. Said he was leaving for Denver anyway for a better position, that I was on my own. She looked up, defiance flashing through her tears. I would have managed somehow, found work, a place to stay. But no one would help once they realized my situation. An unmarried, expectant mother is a scandal no respectable household wants associated with their business. So you walked out into a blizzard with nowhere to go, Quinn said softly. Emma nodded. I thought the next town might be different. I didn't realize how far it was or how quickly the storm would worsen. Her hand moved to her belly. I was foolish, risking my baby's life that way, but I was desperate. You weren't foolish, Quinn said firmly. You were abandoned by someone who promised to care for you, then rejected by a town that should have shown Christian charity. The fact that you survived shows remarkable courage." Emma looked at him with surprise, as if unused to having her actions described in such terms. "Most would call it poor judgment to trust a man like Vernon in the first place." "We all make mistakes in judging character," Quinn said. "The measure of a person isn't in never being deceived, but in how they face the aftermath." Emma studied him thoughtfully. "You're an unusual man, Quinn O'Malley." "Just raised right, I suppose," he said with a shrug, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "What will you do now?" Quinn finally asked. Emma sighed. "I've been thinking about that. I have a little money saved, not much, but enough to get to Laramie or Cheyenne, perhaps. I could find work as a seamstress or cook until the baby comes." The thought of Emma struggling alone in another strange town, trying to support herself while pregnant, then raising a child with no help, twisted something in Quinn's chest. "Or," he said slowly, "you could stay here." Emma's head snapped up. "What?" Quinn hadn't planned to make the offer, but now that the words were out, he didn't regret them. "Winter's just beginning. Traveling would be dangerous, especially in your condition. My cabin's small, but there's room enough. You could stay until spring, at least. Until the baby comes and you're strong enough to travel safely." "I couldn't impose on you for months," Emma protested. "People would talk." "People will talk anyway," Quinn pointed out. "And my nearest neighbors are 5 miles away. I don't much care what anyone thinks." Emma searched his face. "Why would you do this for me? We're strangers." "Not anymore," Quinn said simply. "And I have the space and means to help. Seems wrong not to offer." "I would need to contribute," Emma said. "I won't be a charity case." "You already contribute more than your share," Quinn assured her. "My cabin's never been so clean, and I've eaten better these past 3 days than in the 3 years before." Emma hesitated, torn between practicality and propriety. "It wouldn't be proper. An unmarried woman living with a bachelor." "Proper doesn't keep you warm or fed," Quinn said. "But if it bothers you, we could tell people we're cousins, or that you're a widow renting a room." He paused. "Or we could get married." The words hung in the air between them, as surprising to Quinn as they clearly were to Emma, whose mouth fell open in shock. "I'm not proposing out of romance," Quinn hurried to clarify, though something in him protested the disclaimer. "But it would solve the propriety problem, give your child a name, and ensure you both have security." "A marriage of convenience," Emma said flatly. Quinn nodded, though the term didn't sit right with him. "For now, at least. I respect you, Emma. I think we could build a good life here, maybe even find happiness eventually, but I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give." Emma stood and walked to the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. "You barely know me. I'm carrying another man's child." "I know you're kind, hardworking, and brave," Quinn said. "As for the child, I've never held to the idea that blood is what makes a family." Emma turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "May I think about it, of course," Quinn said, relief and disappointment mingling in his chest. At least she hadn't immediately refused. "Take all the time you need." Emma nodded. "Thank you, I think I'll retire now." After she had gone to bed, Quinn sat long by the dying fire, wondering what had possessed him to make such an offer. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. In just 3 days, Emma had brought life and warmth to his solitary existence. The thought of her leaving left a hollow feeling in his chest. Whatever her decision, Quinn realized, Emma Norwood had already changed his life irrevocably. The next morning brought clear skies and temperatures cold enough to freeze breath. Quinn rose early, stoking the fire before Emma woke. He needed to check his cattle again and bring in more firewood, but he was reluctant to leave before speaking with Emma. Yesterday's impulsive proposal hung between them, and he worried she might feel pressured by his offer. When Emma finally emerged from the bedroom, she looked as if she had slept poorly. She avoided his gaze as she prepared breakfast, and Quinn respected her need for space, focusing on his own chores around the cabin. "The road to town should be passable by tomorrow," he said casually as they ate. "If you still want to leave," Emma set down her fork. "Quinn, about what you said last night, you don't need to decide anything yet," he interrupted. "It was sudden, and I understand if you need time or want to refuse entirely." "It's not that," Emma said. "I'm touched by your offer, truly. It's more generous than anything anyone has done for me. But I can't accept marriage just for convenience or security." Quinn nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in his stomach. "I understand. However," Emma continued, "I would like to accept your offer to stay until spring if it still stands. As your tenant, I insist on paying rent even if it's just through cooking and keeping house." Relief washed over Quinn. "The offer absolutely stands. And your contributions to the household are more than fair payment." Emma smiled, the tension between them easing. "Thank you. It's a sensible arrangement for both of us, especially with winter setting in." "I'll need to go to town tomorrow," Quinn said, shifting to practical matters. "To get supplies and anything you might need." "I should go with you," Emma suggested. "There are things I'll need for the baby, and I'd like to see if I can retrieve my trunk from the boarding house where I was staying." Quinn frowned. "Are you sure? After the way you were treated?" "I need my belongings," Emma said firmly. "And I won't hide as if I've done something shameful. Besides, it might be my last chance to get to town before the snow makes travel impossible for weeks." Quinn admired her courage. "All right, we'll take the sleigh. It'll be more comfortable for you than riding horseback." The next day dawned clear and cold. Quinn hitched his strongest horse to the sleigh while Emma prepared for the journey, bundling herself in every warm layer they could find. The road to town had been partially cleared by other travelers, making the trip easier than Quinn had feared. As they approached South Pass City, Emma grew tense beside him. Quinn reached over and briefly covered her gloved hand with his. "Remember, you have nothing to be ashamed of," he said quietly. "And you're not alone anymore." Emma gave him a grateful look but said nothing. South Pass City had sprung up almost overnight when gold was discovered in the nearby mountains. Despite its rapid growth, it remained a rough frontier town, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few cross streets with more modest structures, all dominated by the stamp mills that processed ore from the nearby mines. In summer, it bustled with activity. In winter, it huddled against the elements, smoke rising from every chimney. Quinn guided the sleigh to the general store first. "Let's get our supplies before dealing with your trunk," he suggested. "That way we can leave quickly if necessary." Inside the store, conversation halted as they entered. Quinn nodded politely to the other customers as he helped Emma remove her heavy coat. Her condition was obvious now, and whispers immediately began. The storekeeper, Walter Hammond, greeted Quinn warmly but cast a curious glance at Emma. "Mr. O'Malley, haven't seen you in town for weeks. Who's your companion?" Before Quinn could respond with their agreed-upon story that Emma was a widowed cousin staying with him for the winter, Emma stepped forward. "Emma Norwood, Mr. Hammond. I believe you know me. I came into your store just last week, looking for work." Her voice was steady, though Quinn could see the effort it cost her. Recognition dawned on Hammond's face, followed by discomfort. "Ah, yes, Miss Norwood. I didn't realize you were acquainted with Mr. O'Malley." "We recently became acquainted," Quinn said smoothly. "Miss Norwood will be staying at my place through the winter." The whispers around the store grew louder. Quinn ignored them, handing Hammond his supply list. "We'll also need anything appropriate for an infant coming in about 2 months. Blankets, clothes, whatever you have." Hammond's eyebrows shot up, but he took the list without comment and began gathering items. Quinn stayed close to Emma as she selected baby supplies, conscious of the stares and murmured comments from the other customers. They were nearly finished when the bell above the door jingled and a woman in an expensive coat entered. She stopped abruptly when she saw Emma. "Mrs. Willoughby," Emma said quietly, acknowledging the boarding house owner who had turned her away. The older woman's lips thinned. "Miss Norwood. I'm surprised to see you still in town, and with Mr. O'Malley, no less." Her gaze flicked between them, disapproval evident. Quinn stepped forward. "Mrs. Willoughby, a pleasure as always. Miss Norwood mentioned she left some belongings at your establishment. We'd like to collect them today." Mrs. Willoughby drew herself up. "I'm afraid that's impossible. When Miss Norwood didn't return, I assumed she had abandoned her property. It's been disposed of." Emma gasped. "My trunk contained everything I own: my mother's Bible, my father's books, all my clothes." "You should have thought of that before disappearing for days," Mrs. Willoughby said coldly. "We're not a storage facility for women of questionable virtue." Quinn felt anger rise in his chest. "Mrs. Willoughby, I suggest you check your storeroom again. Those belongings are Miss Norwood's legal property. If they've truly been disposed of, I'd be interested to know who profited from their sale." The woman flushed. "Are you accusing me of theft, Mr. O'Malley?" "I'm suggesting that Christian charity might have dictated storing a person's worldly possessions for more than a few days, especially in winter." Quinn's voice remained calm, but steel underlay his words. "Now, shall we check for that trunk, or would you prefer I discuss the matter with Sheriff Donovan?" A tense silence fell over the store. Finally, Mrs. Willoughby said stiffly, "I may have been hasty. The trunk might still be in the storeroom. I'll have my son check." "We'll wait," Quinn said firmly. While Mrs. Willoughby left to fetch her son, Quinn completed their purchases. Emma stood beside him, her face pale but composed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Those are the only connections to my parents I have left." "No one has the right to take your belongings," Quinn said, "no matter what they think of your situation." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Willoughby's son arrived with Emma's trunk, which he loaded onto Quinn's sleigh without meeting their eyes. Quinn paid for their purchases, and they left the store in silence, feeling the weight of judgment from everyone inside. As they prepared to depart, the door to the saloon across the street burst open, and a well-dressed man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. He spotted Emma and stopped dead. "Well, look who it is," he slurred. "My dear Emma, still in the family way, I see." Quinn's hand instinctively moved to the pistol at his hip, but Emma placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Vernon," she acknowledged coldly. Quinn studied the man who had abandoned Emma to die in a blizzard. Vernon Blackstone was handsome in a conventional way, with fashionable clothes and the soft hands of someone who'd never done physical labor. Currently, he was disheveled and reeking of whiskey. "Thought you'd left town," Vernon said, swaying slightly. "Who's your new protector? Found another fool to take care of you and your bastard." Quinn stepped forward, but Emma held him back. "He's not worth it," she murmured. Vernon laughed. "Defending your investment, Emma. Smart girl. Always were calculating." "The only calculation I made was believing you were an honorable man," Emma replied evenly. "The biggest mistake of my life." Vernon's face darkened. "You ruined everything with your pregnancy." "I had plans that didn't include honoring your promises," Quinn interrupted, unable to remain silent. "A real man stands by his word and his responsibilities." Vernon sneered. And who might you be, Cowboy? Someone who knows the difference between a man and a coward, Quinn said quietly. Vernon's hand moved toward his coat, where a pistol likely resided, but Quinn was faster. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and delivered a right hook that sent Vernon sprawling into the snow. "Quinn!" Emma gasped. Vernon struggled to rise, blood trickling from his split lip. "You'll regret that," he sputtered. "Not as much as you'll regret coming near Miss Norwood again," Quinn said, his voice dangerously soft. "South Pass City's a small place, Mr. Blackstone. I suggest you remember that." He turned to Emma. "Let's go home." The ride back to the cabin was silent at first, both processing the confrontation in town. Finally, Emma spoke. "You shouldn't have hit him. Vernon's vindictive. He could make trouble." "He already made trouble when he abandoned you in winter," Quinn said. "I'm not afraid of men like him." Emma sighed. "I should have told you he was still in town. I thought he'd left for Denver as he claimed." "Would it have changed anything if I'd known?" Emma considered this. "I suppose not, but I don't want you fighting my battles." Quinn glanced at her. "Is that what you think I was doing?" "I wasn't fighting for you, Emma. I was standing with you. There's a difference." The distinction seemed to surprise Emma. She fell silent again, lost in thought as the sleigh carried them through the snow-covered landscape. That evening, as they unpacked the supplies and Emma sorted through her recovered trunk, Quinn noticed her handling a small packet of letters with particular care. "From your parents?" he asked. Emma nodded. "And my journals. They're all I have left of my old life." She traced the embossed cover of a leather-bound book. "I thought I'd lost them forever." Quinn helped her carry the trunk into the bedroom. "I'm sorry about your other belongings, the ones Mrs. Willoughby actually did dispose of." "They were just things," Emma said. "The important items are here." She hesitated. "Quinn, what you did today, standing with me, no one's done that for me in a long time." "Get used to it," Quinn said simply. "That's what friends do." Emma smiled, and something warm unfurled in Quinn's chest. Whatever label they put on their arrangement, he knew his life had changed irrevocably the night Emma Norwood appeared on his doorstep. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Quinn tended his livestock and maintained the property, while Emma managed the domestic aspects of their shared life. The cabin, once merely a place where Quinn ate and slept, became a home under Emma's influence. She arranged his books more appealingly on the shelves, hung curtains made from fabric purchased in town, and filled the space with the aromas of fresh baked bread and hearty stews. As December deepened into January, snow isolated them further from town. Quinn made one more trip for supplies before the worst storm set in, returning with extra provisions and more materials for the baby's arrival. Together, they converted a corner of the bedroom into a nursery space, Quinn crafting a cradle from pine while Emma sewed bedding and tiny clothes. They fell into the habit of sharing evenings by the fire, reading aloud from Quinn's books or simply talking. Quinn told stories of his years on cattle drives, the characters he'd met, the landscapes he'd crossed, the adventures and misadventures of a cowboy's life. Emma shared memories of her childhood in Missouri, her father's schoolhouse, and her dreams of someday becoming a teacher herself. Carefully, they circled the subject that had brought them together, neither mentioning Quinn's marriage proposal nor defining what their relationship might become. Yet something was growing between them, a connection deeper than convenience, warmer than friendship. One evening in late January, as a particularly fierce blizzard howled outside, Emma winced suddenly while knitting by the fire. Quinn looked up from the harness he was mending. "Are you all right?" "Just the baby kicking," Emma said, rubbing her swollen belly. "He's been active today." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "You think it's a boy?" Emma smiled. "Just a feeling." "Would you like to feel him move? The invitation surprised Quinn. They had maintained a careful physical distance despite living in close quarters. "If you don't mind," he said, setting aside his work. Emma guided his hand to the side of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Quinn felt a distinct push against his palm. "That's amazing," he breathed, wonder spreading across his face. "It is, isn't it?" Emma's eyes were bright with emotion. A little person already making his presence known. Quinn's hand lingered and Emma didn't move to break the contact. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first night. The baby kicked again, breaking the moment. Quinn reluctantly withdrew his hand. "Strong little fellow," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Takes after his mother." Emma blushed. "Quinn, I've been thinking about what happens after the baby comes." Quinn tensed, fearing she was about to announce plans to leave. "Oh, your offer from before, is it still open?" "The arrangement where I stay on as your tenant," relief washed through him. "Of course, for as long as you want." Emma nodded, her fingers working nervously at her knitting. "And the other offer, the marriage of convenience," Quinn's heart stuttered. "That's still open too," he said carefully, "if it's what you want." "I've been considering it," Emma admitted. "Not just for propriety or the baby's sake, but because—" She hesitated. "Because I've come to care for you, Quinn, more than I expected to." Quinn moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I care for you too, Emma. This isn't how I imagined finding a wife, but I can't imagine this cabin without you now." "It wouldn't be fair to you," Emma protested. "Raising another man's child, marrying a woman who I admire and respect," Quinn interrupted, "whose company I enjoy more than anyone I've ever known." He took her hand. "I'm not offering out of pity or obligation, Emma. I'm offering because these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I don't want them to end." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "It's not the romantic love you deserve." "Maybe not yet," Quinn acknowledged. "But I believe it could grow. It's already started to, at least for me." Emma studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or regret. Finding none, she squeezed his hand. "Then yes, Quinn O'Malley, I accept your proposal." Joy surged through Quinn. On impulse, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips there first. It was brief and chaste, but it sealed their agreement more effectively than any words could have. "When?" Emma asked when they parted. "As soon as the weather allows us to reach town," Quinn said. "Unless you'd prefer to wait until after the baby." "No," Emma said firmly. "I want this child born within a marriage. I want him to have your name from the start." Quinn nodded, understanding the importance of this to Emma after all she'd endured. "Then we'll go to town at the first opportunity. Judge Wilson can perform the ceremony." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, both practical and hopeful, for their shared future. When Emma finally retired to bed, Quinn remained by the fire, marveling at the turn his life had taken. He had never expected to find a wife, especially not under such circumstances, but now he couldn't imagine any other path. The opportunity to travel to town came 2 weeks later, during a brief break in the winter storms. The journey was slow and careful, with Quinn constantly checking that Emma was comfortable in the sleigh, wrapped in every blanket they could spare. South Pass City received the news of their marriage with predictable gossip, but Quinn found he cared even less than he'd anticipated. Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow at Emma's condition, but performed the ceremony without comment in his office, with the sheriff and his wife serving as witnesses. Emma wore her best dress altered to accommodate her pregnancy, and a small cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. Quinn had polished his boots to a shine and wore a clean shirt with his least worn coat. The ceremony was brief and practical, nothing like the elaborate church wedding some dreamed of, but when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn felt a profound rightness in the moment. They spent one night at the town's hotel, Quinn's insistence, wanting to give Emma at least some semblance of a wedding trip before returning to their cabin the next day. As Quinn carried their bags inside, Emma paused at the threshold. "Aren't you supposed to carry me over?" Quinn set down the bags and grinned. "I wasn't sure you'd want such foolishness, but I'm happy to oblige, Mrs. O'Malley." Her new name brought a smile to Emma's face. Quinn lifted her carefully, mindful of her condition, and carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he said softly. Emma reached up to touch his cheek. "It already feels like home. Has since that first night." Quinn set her down gently but didn't step away. Instead, he lowered his head and kissed her, a real kiss this time, tender and lingering, full of promise for their future. The shared bedroom that night brought new intimacy, though both agreed to wait until after the baby's birth for the full consummation of their marriage. Still, they slept in each other's arms, Quinn's protective embrace surrounding Emma and the child she carried. February arrived with even harsher weather. Quinn worked doggedly to keep paths clear to the barn and wood pile, ensuring their livestock were fed and their home remained warm. Emma continued preparing for the baby's arrival, her movements growing more labored as her time approached. One evening, as they sat together reading, Emma gasped suddenly and clutched her belly. Quinn was instantly alert. "What is it?" "I'm not sure," Emma said, frowning. "Just a sharp pain." "Probably nothing," she broke off as another pain gripped her. Quinn knelt beside her chair. "Is it time?" "The baby's not due for another 2 weeks." "Babies don't always follow schedules," Emma said, trying to smile through her discomfort. "But it could be false labor. Let's wait and see." They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, Emma's pains had established a regular pattern, and fluid soaked the chair where she sat. "The baby's coming," she confirmed, a mixture of excitement and fear in her voice. Now, Quinn had prepared for this moment but still felt a surge of panic. The nearest doctor was in South Pass City, unreachable in the current weather. He would have to deliver the baby himself, using only the knowledge gleaned from books and Emma's guidance. "Tell me what to do," he said, helping her to the bedroom. Over the next several hours, Quinn witnessed Emma's extraordinary courage as she labored to bring her child into the world. She directed him through preparations, boiling water, gathering clean linens, positioning herself on the bed. When the pains grew intense, she gripped his hand with surprising strength, her face contorted with effort. "You're doing wonderfully," Quinn assured her repeatedly, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Emma O'Malley." Near dawn, after a night of labor that tested both their endurance, Emma gave a final tremendous push, and their child slid into Quinn's waiting hands, a red-faced, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair. "You were right," Quinn said, his voice choked with emotion as he laid the infant on Emma's chest. "It's a son." Emma's exhausted face transformed with joy as she cradled her baby. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Quinn cleaned and swaddled the child as Emma had taught him, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the perfect miniature features. When he placed the bundled infant back in Emma's arms, she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "What shall we call him?" she asked. Quinn hesitated. "He's your son, Emma. You should choose." Emma shook her head. "He's our son now. I want you to help name him. Our son." The words filled Quinn with unexpected emotion. "What about William, after your father, William Quinn O'Malley?" Emma tried the name. "It's perfect." As Quinn sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, the other gently touching his new son's cheek, he felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. This improvised family created through crisis, cemented by choice, was now the center of his world. "I love you," he said simply, the words coming naturally after weeks of growing certainty. "Both of you." Emma looked up at him, surprise giving way to joy. "I love you too, Quinn. I think I have for a while now." Their kiss was gentle, but filled with promise, not the beginning of their story, but perhaps the start of its most important chapter. Spring came to Wyoming with its usual capriciousness, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, muddy roads that froze overnight, and the gradual greening of the landscape. By April, young William was thriving, growing stronger each day under the devoted care of his parents. Quinn expanded the cabin, adding a proper nursery and a larger kitchen where Emma could pursue her newfound talent for baking. They discussed plans for a vegetable garden once the ground thawed completely, and Quinn began preparing additional pasture for the expanded herd he hoped to purchase. Their marriage, begun as an arrangement of convenience, had blossomed into a genuine partnership built on deep affection and mutual respect. The physical aspect of their relationship, delayed by Emma's pregnancy and recovery, had developed naturally, each discovery bringing them closer. When the roads finally cleared enough for travel in late April, they made their first trip to town as a family. South Pass City received them with mixed reactions. Some people still whispered and stared, but others, impressed by Quinn's evident happiness and Emma's dignified bearing, offered congratulations on their marriage and new son. At the general store, Mrs. Hammond cooed over baby William while her husband filled their order. "He's a beautiful child," she said, genuine warmth in her voice. "You must be very proud." "We are," Emma replied simply, exchanging a smile with Quinn. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, they traded the sleigh for wheels. Now that the snow was mostly gone, Quinn spotted a familiar figure weaving down the street. Vernon Blackstone looked considerably worse for wear, his once fine clothes shabby and his face bearing the bloated look of a man who drank too much. Quinn tensed, prepared to protect his family, but Vernon merely glanced their way before ducking into the saloon, apparently unwilling to confront them in broad daylight. "I heard he lost his position with the mining company," Emma said quietly as they drove away. Apparently, he was skimming from the accounts. Quinn wasn't surprised. Men like that eventually reveal their true nature to everyone. Emma reached over to touch his hand. "I'm grateful every day that fate led me to your door instead of letting me follow him to Denver." "So am I," Quinn said sincerely, "though I wish you hadn't had to suffer first." Emma glanced at William, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Some paths to happiness aren't straight or easy, but that doesn't make the destination any less wonderful. As summer approached, Quinn and Emma established their place in the community. Quinn's fair dealings with neighboring ranchers and Emma's willingness to help when illness struck nearby families gradually overcame the initial gossip about their hasty marriage. In June, a letter arrived from Kansas City, a response to inquiries Emma had sent months earlier. Her face was grave as she read it. "What is it?" Quinn asked, concerned by her expression. Emma handed him the letter. "Vernon was married," she said. "The whole time we were together, he had a wife back in Kansas City. That's why he never married me, no matter what he promised." Quinn read the letter, anger rising at this final confirmation of Blackstone's character. "I'm sorry, Emma." To his surprise, Emma smiled sadly. "I'm not really. If I'd known earlier, I might never have come west. I might never have found you." She looked around at their home, at William playing on a blanket nearby. "Everything led me here to this life. I wouldn't change it now." Quinn pulled her into his arms. "Nor would I." He kissed her, still marveling at his good fortune in finding such a partner. "Though I might have preferred you arrived in better weather." Emma laughed, the sound bright in the summer air. "I'll try to be more considerate next time." 1 year after Emma had stumbled through the blizzard to Quinn's door, they celebrated William's first birthday and their first anniversary. The cabin had expanded again now, a proper ranch house with room for the growing family they both wanted. That evening, after William was asleep in his crib, Quinn and Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant orange and gold. "I have something for you," Quinn said, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small velvet box. "I never gave you a proper ring when we married. It seemed time to remedy that." Emma opened the box to find a gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Quinn, it's beautiful," she breathed. "But you didn't need to, I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "Not because our marriage needed validating, but because I want the world to see what you mean to me." As he slipped the ring onto her finger beside the simple gold band they'd purchased for their hasty wedding, Quinn felt the rightness of his life with an intensity that almost overwhelmed him. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emma asked, admiring the ring. "When you found me that night, did you ever think we'd be here a year later?" Quinn considered the question. "No," he admitted. "I was just trying to keep a woman and her unborn child from freezing to death. I never imagined you'd become my reason for waking up every morning." Emma leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "That night, I thought I'd reached the end of everything. Instead, it was just the beginning." Inside the house, William made a small sound in his sleep. Soon, they would go check on him, then retire to their own bedroom, secure in the family they had built together. But for now, they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge above the land that had first separated them, then brought them together. The shelter Quinn had offered that winter night had indeed become permanent, not just a physical home, but a haven of love, trust, and second chances that neither had believed possible before fate intervened in the form of a Wyoming blizzard. As the first star appeared in the darkening sky, Emma made a silent wish, not for anything they didn't already have, but for the continuation of this life they'd created together. Quinn's steady presence beside her, William's future stretching before them, and the promise of more children to fill their home with laughter and love. Quinn seemed to sense her thoughts. "Happy?" he asked simply. Emma turned to meet his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same contentment she felt in her heart. "Completely," she answered, and sealed the truth of it with a kiss as the Wyoming night settled gently around them.